Hey, welcome back everybody. And though I am not able to be here this weekend, being that I'm out on vacation with my wife, I wanted to have something for you guys. So today we are going to explore how missiles get launched off of an F-4 Phantom. And today's focus will be primarily on the air-to-air with the AIM-9 Sidewinders and the AIM-7 Sparrows. The air-to-ground stuff like Mavericks and Shrikes and any other missiles that were carried, we don't really have their pylons handy, so I can't really help explain how those left the jet. But we still have most of the hardware for Sidewinders and Sparrows, so we're going to explore that today. Okay, so we're going to start right here with the Sidewinder rails. The AIM-9 Sidewinders, the heat-seeking missiles, the F-4s could carry up to 4 of these things, 2 on each wings right here on stations 2 and 8. These are fairly simple missiles as far as getting them on and off the aircraft. You got these rails here. You got one right here. This is missile 1, missile 2, 3 and 4 would be on the other side. But they literally just slide right down these rails, and there's a pin in the back where these get stopped. Once they're in place, one of the weapons technicians would come over here and rotate the locking mechanism, which secured the missile in place using these locking lugs. In combat, whenever they would go to employ the missile, whenever the pilot would pull the trigger, there's several things that happen at once inside the pylon. The locking lugs here get retracted, the missile battery activates, and the rocket motor would fire, and the missile literally flies itself off of the aircraft. And once it's in the air, it is 100% on its own. And as a lot of us at DCS know, once Mr. Sidewinder is in the air, he is a friend to nobody. Those things have no capability of picking out a friend or an enemy and will eagerly chase either one given the opportunity. And that is up to and including the sun if it is in the sky. Now, interestingly, and as far as I'm aware, other airframes have a similar layout or a similar way of handling Sidewinders. They are rail mounted and they slide on and they slide themselves off whenever they get launched. Now, the Navy and Marine Corps ended up with some interesting situations over the years, and as far as I'm aware, this has happened a handful of times. Remember what I said earlier, that these missiles just slide on and then they fly themselves off. The only thing that keeps them from traveling forward is these locking lugs. Now, imagine, if you will, a worn out mechanism here, or maybe one that didn't get locked properly before the jet got launched, and let's just say off of an aircraft carrier. Now, as we are all well aware, with Newton's laws of motion, an object in motion tends to stay in motion until acted upon by another force. Where I'm going with that is, if you have an aircraft that lands at approximately 140 to 160 knots and comes to a fast and sudden stop within a couple hundred feet, and various objects aren't fastened securely, some of those objects will come off of the aircraft and end up with a significant hazard on the flight deck. As you can see in this picture, this has happened a few times where an aircraft comes in for an arrested landing, comes to a stop, and the missile itself doesn't want to stop and slides itself off the rail at over 100 miles an hour and goes skating down the flight deck and right overboard and into the water. In almost all cases that I can find, none of these have ever resulted in an explosion or the rocket motor on the Sidewinder igniting and propelling itself down the flight deck. This is just it with its own speed, carrying itself off the rail and going down the flight deck. I can't imagine having to dodge a Sidewinder missile on a flight deck. It just, wow, it just blows my mind. Definitely illustrates how dangerous the flight deck can be. So that covers Sidewinders. Let's go check out Sparrows next. All right, so here we are at Station 6. This would be the right forward Sparrow. And all Sparrows on the F-4 Phantoms were carried in these little recesses, and you had 2 up front and 2 in the back. The 2 up front were on either side of the cockpit, right here near where the splitter plate is for the engine. The 2 in the back were right near inboard of each of the main landing gears. But this is where they would be mounted if they were carried. So what you can see here is a couple of spring-loaded doors. You got one here up about halfway back on the missile body, and then one in the back where the tail of the missile would be. And the Sparrows would be mounted so that their fins were up and down, as well as basically a big giant plus sign. So the upper fin for the mid-body and the tail fin would actually be up inside the airplane. Now, what actually keeps them on the airplane is you got these locking feet. You got one here and one here. This is what retains the missile on the aircraft. So whenever they would get loaded, they would actually engage these locking feet and get held in place. And then held up against these piston feet right here and right here. Now, as far as being able to talk to the aircraft, you have a hole at each station, and in our case, the cable has been removed, but there was a cable that would come out of this hole and plug into the missile so that the aircraft and its radar systems could talk to the missile. And we don't have that anymore, and part of the demilitarization process of this jet was all of her combat capabilities were removed, and this is one of those things. Right here you can actually see a pin switch, so whenever a missile was loaded, that's how the aircraft knew that one was still at this station. Part of the employment of these were radar-guided missiles. And once a target was locked with the radar and they were ready to fire, we got to get this thing out of this recessed area and on its own. So this had a different launching process, and it involves these feet where the missiles are. So up inside the aircraft are a couple of gas charges. They're little breech charges, and we'll go explore those in a minute on one of our other Sparrow launchers that is actually out of the aircraft. But whenever the trigger was pulled, those 2 gas charges would be ignited, and they would do a bunch of things at once. 2 things it would do. The first thing it would do is unlock the missile. So it would unlock these missile retainers, so the missile could be free of the aircraft. And then you have 2 pistons, one up front and one in the back. These would extend at the same time and really fast. So these feet would literally kick the missile off of the airframe and on its own. And in the process, that electrical cable would be disconnected, and then once these pistons reach full extension, the one here in the back has a cable on a cable reel attached to it. That supplied the signal to ignite the rocket motor on the Sparrow. Now, whether it lit or not, that wasn't the jet's problem anymore. It's just getting it clear of the aircraft so it wouldn't hurt anything else on the aircraft. But these pistons would give it enough energy for it to clear the aircraft, even if the rocket motor did not fire. Now, there is an interlock that if you have any stores carried on the belly station, station number 5, that these forward 2 Sparrows could never be used because the rocket motor exhaust could damage whatever was hung there on the center station. So let's get a better look at what this rear piston looks like. All right, so here's the rear piston for the Sparrow. And like I mentioned, whenever these were launched and the missile kicked off of the aircraft, you have this cable, and there's a cable reel inside, and then once it reached full extensions, it hit a switch inside, and that gave the electrical impulse to light the rocket motor. That was the last thing that this thing did before the missile was completely free of the aircraft. Now, these pistons act very, very fast. like they come out of the aircraft and they have, you got some strong springs on the insides of these, and as soon as these things, once that gas charge had dissipated, these would retract on their own, and that happened within half of a second. It's pretty amazing that that's what it took to get these off the aircraft. All right, so what we have here on screen now is an actual Sparrow launcher. This is one of the two that came out of the rear Sparrow launchers. Now, on an F-4, in order to open up the engine compartment doors, these launchers have to be removed from the aircraft in order for the doors to be able to fully open. But this is what the inside of the Sparrow launchers look like. And here you can clearly see, here are those two pistons. You have one here and one up forward. And you can see the tube that would send all that hot gas into the top to force the piston down and kick the missile off of the aircraft. Right here, and this is another thing that, again, is part of the demilitarization process, where they took this F-4's combat capabilities away. They put plugs into the breeches for where the cartridges would sit, and then completely welded them in. So there is no way for us to fix that, and let alone get our hands on any cartridges. So this is a cartridge holder, and the cartridge would sit inside here, and then it would just get screwed into these little ports. You'd have a total of 2 per Sparrow, and these would just get screwed into place, and that was part of the arming process of getting the missile ready for combat. So this is something that the Sidewinders did not require, because they just fly off on their own. The Sparrows need a little extra help to get them off of the aircraft. Here you can see some of the, this is that port right here where the electrical cable would go to talk to the missile, so that the aircraft could talk to the missile, rather, I should say. And then right here in the back, let's see if I can get a little bit better of a shot for you guys. So right here, this is that cable reel, and you can kind of see, you can see the cable, and there's the reel. This is on the rear piston, so when it comes out, that cable goes with it. And as this unwinds, this is also spring-loaded, there is a micro switch, I believe, right underneath here. So once this thing unwinds all the way, it hits that switch and sends that electrical impulse down this cable to light the rocket motor. So this is on the inside of the Sparrow rails, or the Sparrow launchers. All right, so that is how missiles will physically get launched off of the aircraft. We have one more stop today on our Tech Talk, and that is up in the cockpits, because over the duration of the Phantom's lifetime, different things changed up in the cockpit as far as dealing with her air-to-air capabilities. So we're going to go explore that. So to preface this, our aircraft in particular would be pretty typical of a pre-Vietnam and Vietnam War F-4 Phantom. There were improvements that came later after the Vietnam War, and a lot of that is what we see in DCS as far as missile control. So let's go up and get a better look at the weapons control panels. All right, so here we are in the cockpit of the F-4, and this is up in the pilot seat. And this is what would be fairly typical of a early Phantom and one that would have served during the Vietnam War. So here's our missile status panel with our various missile statuses. This would include both Sparrows and Sidewinders. I'm sorry, I'm not able to power this up. Again, all of the armament systems have been permanently disabled on this aircraft. Also included on this is, remember me mentioning earlier that if you had stores mounted on the center line, so on the belly station, number 5, that the forward 2 Sparrows were locked out. So this light right here, which is labeled TK for tank, because frequently there would be a belly tank mounted there, or a rack of bombs, but regardless of whatever was mounted there, this light would illuminate, alerting the crew that your forward two Sparrows were completely locked out. And until that center station, whatever was mounted on that center station was gone. Only then would it ever allow you to fire the forward two Sparrows. This is the missile status panel. This is how we could jettison the missiles. And then down here is our missile control. So this switch on the far left is our missile power switch. So our radar standby, this is what is feeding signal down to the Sparrow missiles. And then after a warm-up, you could send them on, and then after at least 30 seconds, you would get missile ready lights on all of your Sparrows, or if you had a Sparrow loaded on their respective stations, I should say. A ready light would not illuminate if a missile was not present. All right, here is an arming switch for them, which that is a switch that was removed because this is for the missiles themselves. Your master arm for all weapons is this switch down here on the center pedestal. Again, something else that moved later in the Phantom's lives, as well as the station select panel. And there's a lot of stuff that has moved over the years, and this is a lot of it right here. All right, this switch here is the interlock switch, and this is for Sparrows. So the firing computer in the radar would calculate a firing solution for the Sparrows, and as long as it was in range and the Sparrow, according to its calculations, the Sparrow would reach the target, it would allow you to fire that missile. Now, you could turn this to out, and then you could fire a Sparrow outside of those parameters. So if you as the pilot had a good judgment call that, hey, this Sparrow could probably reach that target, even though the computer says it probably won't, you could interlock out and still fire the Sparrow. But with interlock in, unless the weapons computer calculated that this was within parameters, it would prohibit you from launching the Sparrow until all the parameters for that missile were met. All right, so lastly here on our missile control panel is this toggle switch with this switch extension built on. This was a field modification that a lot of squadrons did. And if you could already guess, all of your missile control is right here. If you want to select a Sparrow, you would push this switch up. And if you wanted a Sidewinder or a heat seeker, you would put it into the middle position. It is spring-loaded to the bottom position so for heat reject, so you could select the next Sparrow, or you could select the next Sidewinder in the firing sequence just by pushing that down. As you guys can already see, you have a panel up front here that is not anywhere close to either the stick or the throttle. In a dogfight, or if you were in the air-to-air engagement and you wanted to quickly switch from radar or a Sparrow or to a Sidewinder or the other way, you would have to take your hands off of one of the controls, move your hand up, and toggle the switch. In addition to sometimes also having to take your eyes off of your target to look down at your controls. That is not a great thing, and this has to do with some pilot ergonomics, and that is definitely not at the forefront of the design back in the 1950s. So this, again, was a field modification that a lot of squadrons did so that the pilot could reach down by feel and find this switch and move it into the appropriate position depending on his engagement. So this was something that was pretty nice. And again, a lot of this that you see here is what would have been typical before and during Vietnam. So after that, and due to a lot of pilot requests, all the services said, hey, we need a better solution for weapons control. So McDonnell Douglas built a new weapons control panel and moved a lot of this over to the left-hand throttle, like you can see on screen. And this is the pinky switch that we have within DCS. The DCS F-4E has a lot of the newer features. So a lot of your weapons control, you can select the appropriate missiles just with your hands without having to leave your primary controls. And then there was some other rearrangement of the controls as you see on screen. And this is stuff that had improved weapons control over the Phantom's lifetime. All right, so let's hop out and go back down to the hangar floor. Alrighty, everybody, I hope you enjoyed learning more about the air-to-air combat systems here on the F-4 Phantom. I will be back next weekend. Hope you guys enjoyed that, and thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time.